Hey everyone, welcome back to the PAC-South podcast. We are just removed from Rivalry Week and a few days from Thanksgiving. Pat, happy Thanksgiving. And to the coaches, do want to give a shout out to our two transition programs, Missouri State and Delaware, making bowl games in the first eligible year for them. So big shout out the Blue Hens and the Bears. Bearcats?
Yeah,
Bears.
Bears. Yeah.
Mo State. All right. So hopping into our coaches, like I said, so many things have happened. Lane Kiffin officially taking the train down to Baton Rouge. The Rebs are no longer with Kiffin, but they did not wait long. They immediately hired their DC, Alex Golding. But yeah, Alex Golding, not skipping a beat. Seems like players are pretty happy about that. Should be interesting to see if we see much like portal jumping for the Rebels this year. Um, I believe Chambliss and Simmons both have time, so I would expect one of them to go to LSU with
Mm.
Kiffin. There obviously are more quarterbacks going to the portal. Lenore Sellers of South Carolina, very likely to go to the portal. Sam Levitt from Arizona State, for sure going to the portal. So there will be options for many teams, but obviously LSU is committing a lot financially. They probably will have first picks of
Yeah.
whoever hops into the portal. So LSU fans got to be happy. Ole Miss fans probably okay. They definitely are not fully happy, but they have their guy already. Tennessee fans going, I told you so. So that is our old SEC West. Moving over to SEC East, there is a hire at Florida. They were in the kind of Lane Kiffin sweepstakes a little bit. Um, Surprised that this actually ended up happening. I didn't know that Florida would still go this route with what happened a few weeks ago, but Summerall is leaving Tulane, going to Florida, and Florida fans maybe not necessarily mad at Summerall fully with that hire, but they're very mad at the situation. It was very much a Kiffin or bust for the Gators. Apparently, there is also a protest going on today in Gainesville. So the fans are not happy, very upset with how this process went down, and a lot of them calling for the AD's position to be changed as well. So really interesting times in Gainesville. I mean, a lot of them are kind of viewing it as a Napier 2.0,
Yeah.
which you're trying to elevate from him. That's why you fire him in the middle of the season. But yet we're right back to it. I think Summerall is of better quality than Napier. Definitely more proven. 3 out of the last 4 years, Tulane has 10 wins. So very consistent program there. Summerall continuing that culture. Could do it in Florida, but the SEC is tough. So
Yeah.
LSU, Ole Miss, Florida, Pat, do we have any initial thoughts on these three SEC programs?
Yeah. I think. I don't know. I think it's interesting that Lane decided that LSU was the route that he wanted to go. Obviously, it's hard to say no to 90 mil and what 25 million a year in NIL resources when that's promised to you. And I think he saw LSU as kind of a step up in terms of pedigree, in terms of ability to possibly actually like seriously compete and seriously win a national championship than what he has built at Ole Miss. Um, but at the same time, he did all that talking and he did all those interviews. He did the documentary about how much he loves Oxford and felt like he had finally found a place that kind of like helps him regulate, find himself a little bit. Now after the saga finally concludes, we see him departing for a former SEC West rival and a current sort of SEC jockeying opponent, I guess you could say, because the last few years, Ole Miss and LSU have been pretty comparable in terms of, we'll say, like overall success. Neither of them have made a CFP until probably this year, unless the committee does something crazy with Ole Miss. And you see I guess money does talk, despite all the positive words Lane had to say about Ole Miss, about Oxford. Ultimately, when push came to shove, he went where the money is and where expectations are sky high. And I think he knows the expectations are high, obviously. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken the job. But I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting because if he goes, let's say 9-3 or 10-2 year one, and they miss the CFP, are fans going to start saying, "Oh, we made the wrong hire" immediately, kind of like they did? Granted, Brian Kelly was a bad culture fit, but
Yeah.
similar to what they did with Kelly. And then I think for Florida, I think it's a decent hire. I'm not going to say it's like knocking things out of the park. You'd grade it at like a A+ or anything like that. But I think it's just like a solid B+ hire. There were definitely worse names that Florida could have hired during this coaching
Indeed.
cycle. And I know like the easy thing to do is be like, oh, well, they hired one G5 coach and Billy Napier, and now they're hiring another. So I've seen quite a few people saying on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, that they went from Sunbelt Billy to G5 John. But I don't know. I think Summerall will find success that Napier struggled to at Florida. This is a guy who played in the SEC. He coached in the SEC for a little while at Kentucky, his alma mater. So he knows what it takes to win in the conference, and he knows, I guess, the expectations, right, that are put onto the shoulders of SEC head coaches. And Billy Napier had all that success at Louisiana, but people forget he was fired by Dabo Swinney at Clemson for, let's say, not meeting expectations as their offensive coordinator. Maybe it was like we'll say soft fire, right? He had his play calling duties taken away, and then he
Yeah.
found a different job. But I think they're two pretty solid hires. I like the idea of Ole Miss sticking with somebody in-house who knows the players, who knows the program, with Pete Golding. He was DC at Alabama for a few years as well, so it's not like he's just this random figure. Their defense has been pretty solid the past 2 years that he's been there, and I think that'll, hopefully, in the sake of the Rebs fans, cut down on the amount of guys that are leaving the program to join LSU with Kiffin.
Yeah.
I'm sure some guys will be like, you know what, like, especially defensive players, this was my coach. He believed in me. He gave me an opportunity to succeed. I want to stick it out with him. But I'm sure there's some Ole Miss fans out there who are still upset, regardless of the hire being fairly decent.
I mean, I think Ole Miss keeping the DC, keeping that culture, especially on the defensive side of the ball, it kind of puts them ahead of, you know, worrying about potential portal guys, and then also kind of safeguarding this program that they built now. I mean, Ole Miss is a top contender. They just missed a playoff last year. They're like you say, unless the committee does something crazy, they're fully in the playoff this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, 2 back-to-back years, and they've shown building every single step of the way up until these last 2 seasons. So I think it's great to kind of solidify what you've already created there in Oxford. Yeah, UF, like you said, Summerall, I think is a good hire. From a Florida fan standpoint, though, they were the top of the SEC for a number of years under Urban Meyer. But they've since taken that step back to the middle of the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a Gator fan, is this viewed as a serious hire that's going to get us up there to the top? Like you had like a James Franklin on the board a couple months ago.
Yeah.
James Franklin, everyone is automatically going, Virginia Tech is going to be a contender in 1-2 years in ACC, and they're going to be the top. Do we look at Summerall with Florida's expectations and go, in 2 seasons, they're going to be at the top? I think that's where Gator fans are at right now.
Yeah. And I think, it's fair to have high expectations for the University of Florida. Like, it is a storied and historic program. But I think Gator fans also need to keep in mind they have not won a SEC championship since 2008. It's not like things were just chugging along, even in the late stages of the Urban Meyer years. Like, there was some faltering and there was some slipping. Of course, they've reinvested in the program, they've reinvested in facilities, and that's why they want to see these results that sort of align with that and align with the money they've spent in NIL. But I think Florida fans also have to be a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but understanding maybe of like where the program is right now, and not put unfair expectations on Summerall that he has to win, let's say, 10 games year one. I think going from a 4-win season to an 8-win season is clear growth. And that puts you on the right path and the right trajectory to then get into the CFP year 2 or year 3. Um, because, yeah, I mean, it's not like it's been good the past few years with Billy Napier, besides catching lightning in a bottle last year. And even before that, it was a lot of inconsistency, a lot of up and down. Outside of the first 2 years, Dan Mullen was there.
Yeah, for sure. And Dan Mullen, a guy over at UNLV, he's taking them to the Mountain West. We'll talk about that a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more later. But it should be interesting if he's looking to maybe elevate or move back east to where he had coached previously from Vegas. But Mountain West is kind of a wide open conference.
Yeah.
UNLV going to the Pac-12 next year also will be a wide open conference. Should be interesting to see how that all shakes out and what Mullen kind of sees there as well. Um, have a guy who left one team at the altar, probably could have gone to another one, but instead went to the third. That is Alex Golesh from USF, went to Auburn, seemingly left Arkansas at the altar to go coach a little bit closer to where he is from in Tampa right now. But also, his name didn't come up with it. But would Florida have been better off keeping a guy who's actively recruiting Florida right now and has built a program in that? Auburn, obviously, this is a pretty good hire, and I think a little bit out of left field for most. Kind of DJ Durkin sounded like he may get the interim tag removed, but
Yeah.
just didn't have enough success at the end of the year to get that. What do you see with Golish and Auburn? And then also, did UF make a mistake with that hire?
Yeah, I think Golish is a really good hire for Auburn. He's one of those guys who, obviously, he's still in the early years of being a head coach. But when he was a coordinator working at Iowa State, working with Josh Heupel at Tennessee, he's found tremendous success in generating explosive offenses. So getting a guy like that to come to Auburn, work with Deuce Knight, who came in with all this hype and all this expectation, I think is a huge get for them. And I think their offense will definitely be dramatically improved next year. Um, and this is a team whose strength all season was their defense. So I think if you can maybe convince DJ Durkin to stick around as defensive coordinator or find another
Mm-hmm.
elite DC to bring in, Auburn's going to be in a good position under Golish. I think, again, he might not be like the huge flashy name because, yes, he's only been the head coach at USF. But he's a guy, when you look at his stint or time served as an assistant, like he has expectations, or we'll say like results that prove that he is a solid coach and he can generate the desperate offensive rejuvenation that Auburn really needs. Especially if you watched that game last night, Auburn's defense played their butt off the entire time, and they put themselves in a position to win that game. It just seemed like Auburn's offense just couldn't get over that hump, and that's why they ultimately lost to their biggest rivals. In terms of, is it a mistake? I'm going to go with no. And the only reason I'm going to say no is because Summerall is a little bit more of a proven commodity as a head coach. He had success at Troy. He had success at Tulane. Where Golish, I mean, yes, he had a huge improvement at USF in year one, but they weren't like true contenders, we'll say. And even this year, when he had the opportunity to get USF to the college football playoff, it seemed like, I don't know, maybe he got distracted with the other opportunities that were presented to him, or maybe he just mismanaged the games a little bit, but USF let some games slip away from them that I feel like they could have and should have won.
Yeah. All right. Very nice. And then we have Arkansas, the team that was left at the altar of this pair. They did turn around. They got Silverfield out of Memphis. So kind of a good, like, in your backyard hire for Arkansas. Memphis, obviously, is a program that has produced, like, a number of good coaches. And a lot that are currently coaching in the Power Four ranks. I believe there was like a 6 year period where they were just getting poached left and right. Justin Fuente went to Virginia Tech. Mike Norvell still at Florida State. That's a whole nother can of worms, but he will be returning for the Seminoles next year. But yeah, Silverfield, a decent year for the Tigers. They kept them in the American hunt in a very like crowded top of conference, and had some playoff buzz as well. So he'll probably move over. A lot of that team will likely join him in Fayetteville. Um, I don't think this is a bad hire. I think it looks a little weird with Pittman getting fired so early in the season, then Golish almost being for sure tied to you,
Yeah.
and then 0 hour, one switch, and then you have another one. But not an awful hire, I think, for the Razorbacks. I don't know if this fully answers every question that they have and need to like rebuild, but the SEC is so tough. I mean, we're only talking about SEC teams except for one with the coaches today, and yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, he gets it done. What are your thoughts on the hire in Fayetteville?
Yeah, I think it's a okay hire. I'm kind of in the same stance you are. It's not going to wow anybody, but it's not like the worst candidate you could have hired for this position. Um, I know a lot of Arkansas fans are upset at this hire, actually. Kind of a similar vibe to what's going on in Florida. There were people, I saw some videos earlier, protesting at the campus in Fayetteville about this hire because Silverfield's a guy who, yes, he inherited Mike Norvell's teams, and yes, he's won a decent amount of games, but he's never made the AAC championship while at Memphis. And because of that, I think a lot of Memphis fans held a little bit of animosity towards him. And since he is so close, Memphis and Fayetteville are only, like a 3 or 4 hour drive from each other.
Pretty close, yeah.
Since they are so close, I think a lot of that overlap and those hard feelings from Memphis fans are kind of influencing Arkansas fans' perspectives on this hire and leading to them being a little bit underwhelmed or a little bit upset with this. I know, like you said, the other day it came out Golish is going to Arkansas, and apparently he was kind of upset that this got out before everything was inked and sealed. And that could possibly be why he decided to take the Auburn job instead. And then there was buzz that the South Alabama, DC, Shane Womack was going to take the job too, to then pivot to Ryan Silverfield. I can see why Hogs fans are underwhelmed a little bit, but I don't know. I think Arkansas fans also kind of have to realize the state of their program in the same way that Florida fans do. Yes, it's an amazing fan base. Yes, they show up for every game, regardless of how good or bad Arkansas is. But Arkansas has really been a pretty mediocre program for the past, we'll say, like 4 or 5 years, right? Most of the Pittman era, he had a few peaks where it kind of seemed like they were about to turn it around, just to slide right back. So I don't know. You kind of need one of these guys who might not be a huge name or a huge splash to come in, change your culture, and then work your way back up to, let's say, a top tier job.
Sure. We'll stay in the SEC for this one, and then we'll move out of conference with breaking news with it as well. But Carolina fires their OC. Already made an apparent hire. John David Baker, the OC of East Carolina, will stay in the Carolinas, but now going to South Carolina. Decent pickup for the Gamecocks. Obviously, don't know who our signal caller will be there in Columbia, but it definitely seems to be bringing an offense that has been more times than not boring to watch, kind of into the modern day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a decent pickup there for the Gamecocks in what will be a crucial year for head coach Shane Beamer. Pat, what are your thoughts seeing some of the play calls there at ECU?
Yeah, I feel pretty excited about it. I think it is a good hire for the program, assuming that everything kind of gets across the line without any hitches. Hopefully it's not a Alex Golish situation where it seems like it's going to take place and then at the last minute we see something else shift or move away. But I think John David Baker is a candidate who a lot of Carolina Gamecock fans were really excited about in the weeks since Mike Shula's firing. Just look at the success ECU has had this season. I think they averaged like 33.5, something like that, points per game this year. They were 15th in the country in total offense, 13th in the country in yards per game. Like, it's clearly an offense that puts up a lot of yardage and as a result puts up a decent amount of points. Um, yes, you could probably nitpick and say, all right, well, like against Tulane, they didn't look great, but you also have to kind of remember, while ECU had a really good season this year, they don't have the NIL money and they don't have some of the top tier players that programs like Tulane, programs like Memphis have in the American. And I think until ECU kind of redoes their collective and redoes their NIL, they're going to still be in that position. So I think it's a good hire. It's a young coach with a lot of upside, and I think that's kind of what you need at this point for Shane Beamer, in the sense that they do have proven success, right? But it's also not somebody who is, let's say, super established, risking everything for what might be a 1-year job if things don't work out. So, given the circumstances surrounding the job, surrounding the hot seat that Shane Beamer is probably already on or going to find himself on headed into next year, I think it's a good hire. What about you, TJ?
Yeah, I like I said, I think that it brings kind of modern football on offense to Columbia, and I think that it gives them a chance whether Sellers stays or not. I mean, the defensive side of the ball, a name that we'll talk about here in just a few moments, they've gotten it done. It's been the offensive side of the ball more years than not under Shane Beamer, um, that has not allowed them to win football games. Had they had a more inventive or had a more consistent offense, I think that then you're looking at a South Carolina who's in the playoff last year. I think that instead of having 1 year a bowl game, 1 year a miss, 1 year a bowl game, you wouldn't see that trend in Columbia like we have been under Shane Beamer. So I think this is a great hire for them if they can hold him for a few years and kind of get some stability and an offensive identity in Columbia. I think that would be incredible and important for Shane Beamer and his tenure going forward in Columbia. Our final initial coach is going to be Pritchard going to Stanford. Andrew Luck names his full-time coach there in Palo Alto, and I don't dislike the hire. I think it makes sense. Certainly, there's a relationship there between General Manager Andrew Luck and Coach Pritchard now. I just think that Stanford unfortunately wasted a year getting to this point. I think that if you're going to have the interim coach, you need to go make a splash with that hire. And he can't tell me that this wasn't an option that was already on the board before going into this past season. So for Stanford, going forward, I think it's a good pick, but just wasting a whole year for this, I think was unnecessary. I don't know your standpoint on it. I just think that this was something that could have been avoided, and they could have used this year as a building year rather than kind of a throwaway year.
Yeah, and especially when you consider like one of the top candidates to get the job was the guy who they had as the interim coach this year, Frank Reich. There's a lot of speculation that they would just drop the interim tag and make him the official coach. So to see, you flow through this pretty uninspiring interim year outside of beating your biggest rival, which obviously is a huge accomplishment. It's a little confusing. And while I do think Andrew Luck obviously loves and cares about Stanford and wants to get that football program on the right path, I think it is definitely an upward trajectory or an upward battle to see that happen. And I don't know if hiring a guy who you're familiar with because you played with him, you replaced him when you came to Stanford, is, let's say, like the best call in that scenario, when I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you could have given a guy who has ties in the area a call and seen if they were at least interested, right? Maybe reach out to UCLA, see if the interim coach, who was also the interim coach last year at Fresno State, Tim Skipper, is interested in the position, right? It's probably not a flashy, sexy hire, but the guy has proven that he can turn around teams, stabilize programs, and that's kind of what Stanford needs right now. So, yeah, I'm not sure if this is the best hire for Stanford, but I think we can only sort of see how this plays out.
Absolutely. And then our breaking news that we got just a few moments ago. Obviously, Jonathan Smith, one of the firings this morning at Michigan State. If you follow us on Instagram, we posted that, yes, we unfortunately were expecting this one. What wasn't expected is how quickly they found a replacement. Since starting the recording for this podcast, Pat Fitzgerald seems to be on his way to East Lansing. That is of the Detroit Free Press. Um, so this could be a really good pickup, I think, for Michigan State. Pat Fitzgerald, obviously very familiar with the region, very familiar with the conference. Um, Obviously, there was stuff surrounding why he did not stay at Northwestern, but that has since been figured out. So now him going to Sparty, I think, could be a great pickup for them. And he's done a lot with a little.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's going into a much different Michigan State than what we had 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they're in the 4-team playoff. They're competing for Big Ten championships. They have one of the best defenses in the country. Um, Now, not a whole lot to hang your hat on. So I think that, sure, slow year one. I don't think this is going to be a portal and flip situation.
No.
Um, but I mean, you give him the time and the resources. I think that Pat Fitzgerald can bring winning football back to Michigan State. So, of the hires, obviously LSU is the biggest one. I would argue this is the second best hire that we're at least going to talk about today. Pat, I don't know how you feel about a fellow Pat going to Michigan State. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is a good hire from, let's say, like coaching ability perspective with Sparty. Um, as you mentioned, obviously there was kind of that whole cloud over Fitzgerald with the hazing thing his last few years at Northwestern, which ultimately led to his firing. However, like you said, he's been cleared of any involvement, any knowledge of that. So it's not like he's a guy who's going to bring a negative culture to the school. He's not a guy who, let's say, like former players are going to not speak out for, right? There's a big support for Pat Fitzgerald even after he got fired with former Northwestern players, talking about how he is a very strong coach. He can really transform places, cultures, and I think that's what Sparty needs right now. I'm just hoping that they give him the time that they did not give Jonathan Smith, right? Like, obviously, Jonathan Smith had two pretty unsuccessful seasons in East Lansing. But if you look at his tenure at Oregon State, it didn't exactly start off swimmingly. He built that thing slowly. But I think the era that we're in with NIL, there's not a whole lot of patience from programs like Michigan State who have had success, particularly in the last, let's say, like 10 to 15 years, to want that slow build back to relevancy. I think they're going to want more immediate results. And I think hiring a Midwestern guy who has proven, let's say, like success in the conference that you play in to fill that position is a good call and a good hire. I'm not saying Sparty's going to be, let's say, like 8-4, 9-3 next year, but I think they will turn it around. I think they're definitely going to make a bowl game. And I think hopefully for them and their fans, it'll be a progression back towards relevancy and back towards, being the Michigan State of the 2010s.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then our other coach firing that we had this morning came out of Coastal Carolina. Tim Beck is out there. So the Chanticleers have also joined the market. And there's a lot of coaches available or, theoretically available. They've not been tied down to a new buyout contract. It does appear UCLA, who is still searching for their coach, Bob Chesney from James Madison, is very tied to that school right now. I think so tied that it would be shocking that a deal is not done there. You do have a Jed Fish who's at Washington, who's not available, but possibly could be on the move. Um, Coach O obviously wants to return to coaching. He is an available option. Originally tied to Oregon State, they have made a hire since. But then you have a lot of other names as well, coordinators, coaches that were fired this past year. For example, Brian Kelly.
Mm,
Don't know if he's going to hop back in, but he is on the market. And with these programs, they could fit a Brian Kelly. You have now Tulane open, Memphis,
yeah.
USF, higher end G5 conferences who need a coach and don't want to lose their success. There's a lot of baggage that comes with Brian Kelly, but he's coached at a high level. Sure, he hasn't had the best success at a high level, i.e., multiple you had a Heisman Trophy winner. You have multiple guys who are showing out in the NFL. He didn't make the playoffs with them. Nonetheless, though, Brian Kelly knows how to get them in. And I think that you can kind of hide that in those programs when you just get the talent. You can win the games like that if you're playing a ECU, a USF every
Mm,
week versus playing a Bama,
yeah.
Texas
Yeah.
every week. So that could be a good fit there for both sides. Hopefully, everything else gets settled out with the Brian Kelly camp. Um, Cal still on the board. Coastal obviously just joined the board, and Penn State. Penn State fires James Franklin very early in the year. James Franklin has since already been hired. Penn State, no one is tied to that job. Matt Rule, initially, it seemed like it. Nebraska jumped on him immediately, got him the extension. Now, Penn State might just be sitting there holding the groceries. I don't know who they can really go get. I mean, obviously, we haven't talked about the NFL aspect. Would they go get a coordinator from the NFL? Is Penn State? Are we hitting the alarm button if you're a Nittany Lion?
Yeah, I think you got to be worried that you haven't really been able to land any of the, we'll say, bigger names that you've been tied to. Matt Rule, Eli Drinkwitz, to name a few. I think even the whole speculation, I didn't really read much into it, but around Kalen DeBoer possibly going to Penn State if Bama had lost last night in the Iron Bowl. I think that's kind of putting Penn State fans in a weird position where they're getting pulled in a million different directions, right? There's no clear vision on, all right, this guy is going to be the next coach. This guy has ties to the area. He can recruit the region, blah, 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 blah. A lot of the buzz that I've been seeing today is Brian Dabble, the fired New York Giants head coach, who was OC at Bama for a little bit before he
Yep.
became an NFL OC. And I believe he has Penn State ties as well. Um, so I think they're kind of in an awkward position where you might have to settle for, like you said, an NFL coordinator, a former NFL head coach like Dabble, instead of one of the bigger name college guys, because it seems like the SEC teams were very quick to fill their vacancies.
Mhm.
And for those guys who may have been available at one point, their teams were pretty quick to sign them to extensions to prevent them from then leaving. So
Right.
you really got to make a decision here, especially with the changes to the portal. Right? We only have the winter window now. We don't have the spring window anymore. Um, you really kind of have to figure out what your vision is for the future, get this settled before bowl week starts. Or bowl selections start, so that you can have that solid base and that time to kind of establish recruiting, get yourself into the portal, be ready for those guys who are either going to try and leave your program or possibly be interested in coming there.
Yeah. No, 100%. Few other names as well on the board, maybe not necessarily Penn State targets, but Manny Diaz at Duke. He's been proven to like really elevate culture at programs. Obviously, Miami is definitely in the place that it's at right now because of his little stint there before going to Cristobal, poaching him from Oregon. Um, you have Jeff Traylor at UTSA, Gus Malzahn, wherever he is right now, because he's kind of, yes, he's at Florida State. Oh, is he at Florida State? Um, David Braun, uh, Clayton White, coordinator at South Carolina, the defense coordinator. And then an interesting name that I want to bring up because I don't think he's really being talked about it. Not because he's doing a bad job, not because he's doing a good job. He's just kind of doing a job after there was so much hype many years ago in the coaching carousel, and that's PJ Fleck up there in Minnesota. Um, you know, the Golden Gophers are just kind of treading along. They get like one or two big wins a year, but then they drop a game that they shouldn't. Next thing you know, they're looking at 7-5. That's kind of the consistency that they're at right now. Um, I think both parties, this could be a good move if he does decide to jump if someone calls. Obviously, it's got to be the right fit, but just kind of get the boat rowing again. I don't think that they're really moving in any kind of direction there in at Minnesota. I think that that program could enjoy a new coach, new take on the culture, and then PJ Fleck kind of finding a new fire to get going. I think that it could benefit both sides. I'm not saying that this change needs to happen because I think Fleck could still see success in Minnesota, but it's just been so stagnant for a couple of years that I feel like it's worth bringing up as a potential candidate. Um, say like a Cal. This could be like a potential hire where it's not a step back, it's not a step forward. It's just kind of even. Everyone gets a fresh start. Any big names of obviously I just talked a lot about PJ Fleck, but that I just discussed as well or brought up that are intriguing to you in this cycle.
I feel like a guy to kind of keep an eye on who probably isn't like as big of a name as he was maybe like half a decade ago. Um, Especially with the Coastal job being available, is Sean Elliott, former Georgia State head coach, current, I guess he's promoted again to offensive line coach temporarily at South Carolina. Obviously, he knows the area well. He can recruit the region well. And I don't know, I feel like if Coastal is trying to get a guy who has had pretty decent Sun Belt success at a school that is not exactly known for supporting their football team very well with Georgia State, um, he's a potential name to keep an eye out for. But I feel like I don't know. I think most of the bigger names this cycle, whether they're coordinators, whether they're head coaches, are going to wind up kind of relatively staying put. Of course, Lane could shake some things up and try and bring some coordinators with him to LSU or vice versa. Maybe Summerall tries to pull some guys to Florida with him. But I don't know. I don't see a ton of bigger names, let's say, jumping ship and leaving where they're at this carousel.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, obviously, already been a chaotic process. Few more answers that need to be found, but yeah, it looks like we are winding down this carousel now, unless there is one major shakeup that can get everything going again. Um, but this upcoming week, yes, there is still football with all the hirings and firings that we've had. This is our conference championship week, believe it or not. And we're going to hop into some picks now. Starting with Conference USA, Kennesaw State. What a story. They are now in the Conference USA championship game after coming up to FBS just a few years ago and not looking good in that transition. And they just all clicked it together, and they're facing a team that we talked last week. We did not see them in this situation. That's Jacksonville State. First year head coach Rich Rod said, "I'm out." A lot of the roster said, "I'm out." Uh, a lot of a rebuild for the Gamecocks, and they figured it out. The culture was strong enough in that locker room that they could get it going. This game is going to be played at Jacksonville State.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not a long distance to travel for Kennesaw State,
Not too bad.
but this is just a fun matchup.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned Kennesaw State. This is the first big game in that program's history. Jacksonville State has seen a little bit more of this. They've been to a few bowl games. They were in the conference championship game last year. Overall, just more accustomed to winning recently, especially at this FBS level. Um, so I like the Gamecocks getting this Conference USA championship. Um, there's a lot of stuff that happened with the playoffs. That this is one of the few conference championship games that they are nowhere near it. So just going to be a feel good season for the Gamecocks in uh, this kind of new era of the program. So who do you like in Conference USA?
You know, it kind of defies logic because these teams did play each other in Alabama just a few weeks ago. And Jacksonville State won, I think, by 9 points, I want to say. I think the final was like 35-26 or 35-24, something in that range. Um, but I don't know. I just really like what Jerry Mack has done with Kennesaw State. I'll say maybe he's not like the biggest name, but he might be a guy to keep an eye on for some of these smaller programs as their coaches might be getting poached. It is kind of a vicious cycle where the big teams will take coaches from, let's say, like more successful G5 teams, and then those teams will take from the lower end perceived G5. So I don't know. I just really like what Jerry Mack's done with Kennesaw State this year. As you mentioned, it's incredible the turnaround that they had. I think they won 2 games last year, and to now be on the verge of 10 wins, either
Yep.
here in the conference championship or in a bowl game. Incredible job. And I don't know. I believe in Kennesaw State, so I'm going with the Owls to win the CUSA championship.
All right. We're giving a hoot there in CUSA. Hopping over to the MAC, we have Miami, Ohio versus Western Michigan. And I don't need to talk about this too much because I think everyone knows where my pick is going to go. I bought this team many weeks ago um, against what I actually wanted to do. But um, I have the Broncos in this. I believed in them from very early. They were on my radar to start the MAC this year. Going into the season, they kind of got an early win against Toledo that I felt like got them ahead of schedule, and they just kept going with it in a MAC conference that continues to MAC conference. Um, I just like the Broncos here. I'm sorry, Red Hawks. I don't think you have much of a chance. But I don't know, Pat. Do you think the Red Hawks have a chance this weekend?
I don't know. It seems like we're different on our first 2 picks here. I think that
Okay.
Miami, Ohio is probably, besides Toledo, the most talented team in terms of like roster construction. In the MAC, they've been here before. Granted, they lost last year to Ohio in this very game. But I think that the consistency of being in this position on a fairly frequent basis for the program does help things a little bit. You kind of know how to adjust, you know how to react in this scenario where there's a little bit more pressure, a little bit more to play for. I know the game was in Oxford earlier this
Mhm.
year when Miami, Ohio beat Western Michigan. But I don't know. I really like this Miami, Ohio team. They stumbled out of the gate a little bit, weren't great in the non conf, and then just really stabilized as they progressed through their max schedule. And I don't know. I just feel like they are a more, we'll say, complete or well-rounded team than Western Michigan is, and they are the only team in conference play to beat these Broncos. So I don't know. Let's
Mhm.
see if they can hit gold twice.
Sure. And I mean, I think the playoff committee would be thrilled to have conference champion Miami in the fold there. Headed to the Sun Belt. This is the only conference left that has divisions, and I think that explains this matchup. We have Troy playing James Madison. Troy, I think, kind of really snuck in there right at the end
Hmm.
to win the South Division for the Sun, or are they East West South Sun Belt? Man,
I think
I don't
they're
know.
West. I think it's East
Or
West.
is it East West?
Yeah.
Okay, either way, Fun Belt. We get the Trojans. Yes, this is a team that, historically speaking, is someone that's in the top of the conference. However, those were kind of the days before James Madison joined the conference,
Yeah.
and since then, obviously, Coach Kurt Signetti was there. JMU really didn't skip a beat. They had a little bit more of a down year, but still, I believe 9 wins in a bowl game. Um, win, I'm pretty sure, for the Dukes. And then obviously this year they are sitting at 11-1, the opportunity to be 12-1, and a possible playoff berth. Um, I think you look at the schedule. Yes, they had a game that they lost in Louisville. They lost that by 14 points. Louisville, Really good team, not a good team, maybe a good team again. Um, so that's their one loss. You look at everything else down the line. They play a Wazoo team almost the exact same way that an Ole Miss plays that Wazoo team in the exact same situation. I like the Dukes here. I don't think the Trojans stand much of a chance. Not that it's going to be like they don't stand a chance, but it's like a respectable score. I don't think they're on the same field. Dukes by at least 50.
Mm. Yeah, I'm with you here. I think James Madison is clearly the better team. Shout out to Troy, though. They found a way to stabilize things again under Jared Parker and still find themselves in the conference championship despite what looked like kind of a shaky season at the midpoint. They went on that run. Goose came back. That kind of helped their offense find itself a little bit better. But the spread is 22.5 points for a reason. I think James Madison is clearly the better team. And while obviously you shouldn't use spreads solely to help you pick games, I think that's indicative of the talent difference that we see here.
For sure.
So, yeah, despite let's say a good effort from Troy to really turn things around, beat Southern Miss this weekend to get themselves to this point. I think that game itself was kind of like deciding who was going to be the lamb going to slaughter, you know?
Yeah. Um, going to the conference we've talked about so much this year. This is, I guess, the third best matchup. There's some good matchups this weekend. Um, Nonetheless, shout out Soar the Eagle. We are in the American Conference with North Texas versus Tulane. Um, both coaches having been hired away. Only one coach will still be coaching this one. North Texas will still have Eric Morris. Oklahoma State and North Texas have said that he will coach out the rest of the year. I think that's massive for the locker room. I think that's massive for the momentum that
Mm-hmm.
they have going in to the end of the season, into this game. Tulane, Coach Summerall going to Florida, that is expected to happen immediately. I think based on that alone, I think Eric Morris with that locker room, that mean green offense, I think they're going to keep it going. I like North Texas in this one. That high powered offense is just incredible when they're rolling. Um, mean green
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah. This kind of almost brings a tear to my eye, you know, as a North Texas truther. Um, I believed in this team from the very early stages of the season. Decided to spend a Friday night up in Charlotte, North Carolina, watching them set some records
Yeah,
against the 49ers. And I think that even if John Summerall was coaching this game, I feel like North Texas is the more talented team, which is kind of a crazy thing to say because you don't think of North Texas as this like powerhouse program. They were ranked
indeed.
this past week, and it was the first time they had been ranked since I think the 60s or maybe even ever in the program history. So it really speaks a lot about what Eric Morris has built there. That's why I really think despite Lane being kind of the big splashy hire, I feel like really the best, we'll say, value hire because it's not costing Oklahoma State $90 million is Eric Morris, especially if he brings Drew Mestamaker with him. And I don't know, I like the Mean Green to win this game, and who knows, maybe depending on our results in future games that we'll discuss, we could see the Dukes and the Mean Green both sneak their way into the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously the American champion looks to kind of be a lock for that fifth conference championship spot. But we still need to figure out the fourth, and we'll get to that here in a few picks. But first, the Mountain West Conference. The Mountain West Pooter seems to have picked its teams. How it did it, we really don't know. I don't think it knows. But we have Dan Mullins, UNLV, versus the not Ashton Genty Boise State Broncos. This game is going to be in Boise, even though we thought that this game is now in Vegas. Um, and I gotta say, I'm disappointed in this game. I think that the true Mountain West Championship was actually played last weekend in Albuquerque between San Diego State and New Mexico. I think those two teams were the best two teams in the conference. New Mexico, at the end of the year, hottest team. San Diego State best team roster throughout the year, but that's not what we have. So we have the third place game apparently. I like Boise to get this done at home on the blue turf. Dan Mullen, his return to coaching, definitely great success. Getting to a conference championship game. I said that they were going to get there despite themselves earlier in the year. I think this team just lacks the consistency and a little bit of the talent that they had last year under Barry Odom. So I like Boise State to continue the winning ways that only they know on the blue turf.
Hmm.
Pat.
Yeah, I don't know. This is it's kind of a weird, like you said, matchup. It seems like the Mountain West told the computer, all right, pick one of the teams that's leaving the conference and one of the teams that's staying to play in this championship game. The team that's staying that got picked is UNLV. The team that's leaving that got picked is Boise State. And
Rebs aren't leaving?
no, I think they're staying. I'm pretty sure they're staying. I know San Diego State and Boise State are definitely gone, though.
All right, Rebs. Okay, all right. Missed that one. Make a note. All right, yes, you were saying your pick.
I don't know. I think this is going to be an interesting game because we know that UNLV has zero defense. This game was played already in what was that, like mid to late October, and Boise State just totally wiped the floor with UNLV. I think it was like a 22 or 23 point differential. I'm not thinking it's going to be that big of a difference in this game. They are saying Maddox Madsen is going to play. Or at least try to play. They say he'll be back for practice this week, which does make a difference when you're not playing a walk-on at quarterback. But I don't know. I just feel like UNLV has too many defensive lapses and defensive holes to really see as like a true, let's say, contender or a threat to win this game. And for that reason, I am sharing your thoughts. I think Boise is going to get it done. And, in pretty much the best Boise State fashion possible, send themselves out of the Mountain West with a title.
Yeah, very, very Boise State with their success. Now moving over to our power conferences. The first one, Big 12. We have BYU rematching Texas Tech. And I think, unfortunately for BYU, they have to play this game. I think Texas Tech gets it done once again. The game in Lubbock was not much of a game, and that's with Texas Tech having a not great first half. BYU, yes, they only have the one loss to Texas Tech, but they haven't been as strong. The one loss to this team was a very bad performance. They play a UCF team last week who jumped on them immediately before BYU could wake up. Obviously, if Texas Tech does that this weekend, the game is over before it even starts. So I like the Red Raiders to roll pretty confidently here.
Yeah, I also like Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech is just sort of like a different beast when you look at the rest of the Big 12 teams this year. The physicality that they play with is just totally different than anything you really see from other Big 12 fronts, whether that's on the offensive line or the defensive line. And you could really see that in that BYU game. Even though the offense wasn't really humming and clicking in the first half, BYU could do literally nothing against that Texas Tech defense.
Right.
So I think that's a good indicator of things repeating themselves. And I think Texas Tech is going to want to win this game pretty comfortably because I feel like if they get style points, who knows, maybe they jump over, I don't know, let's say Oregon, right? A team like that. Or if Georgia loses to Alabama, or maybe one of the Big Ten teams, obviously one of them has to lose, falls out of the top four, they could find themselves in that first round bye position, which I'm sure they would like, get healthier, have even more time to study film on your potential opponent. So I like Tech to get it done, and I think they're going to try and make a statement with the way that they get it done.
Very fair. Very fair. Going to the SEC now. Another rematch in this game. Alabama getting it done the first time, but Georgia, Alabama. Seems like we see this game in Atlanta at least every 2 or 3 years right now. Alabama obviously holding the significance of this series in these bigger games. Um, but I like Georgia here. I think Georgia gets it done. I think it's going to create a very weird conversation for the committee. Obviously, Alabama getting in kind of at the last minute. A&M should not have lost to Texas, but they did. Alabama gets the job done against Auburn. They make it to this game, opening the door for a third loss. Alabama currently in the playoff picture. A third loss could move them out. You have a fringe Miami team, a fringe Vanderbilt team. Obviously, it depends on what happens in the ACC title game that we'll talk about next. But I think Georgia gets it done, and I think this game is close. But if it's not close, very weird conversations to be had and very tough decisions to be made. Pat, do you see this, or do you think that the committee gets off?
Um, I kind of agree with you. I think this is going to create some headaches and some nightmares for the committee. I think Georgia is going to win this game, even though they didn't look great at the Benz this past weekend. This is a location that they're very familiar with. They play a lot of neutral site games there. They're in the SEC championship like every year, it seems. So I think Georgia is going to be able to get it done, kind of like we've been talking about. Maybe um, with those comparisons to like the late 2010s Clemson teams where things were really humming under Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. They have that one slip up game, but then right the ship and figure out a way to, ultimately get towards or close to their goal. I think Georgia's slip up game was the Bama game earlier this year. I think when you look at those teams, Georgia's defense is much improved since that Bama game, and that has helped them sort of stabilize things and emerge again as really like one of the top two or three teams in the sport this year. As you mentioned, any Georgia and any Alabama fan knows that the balance of this series has swung to Alabama in the Kirby Smart era, but I think Kirby's going to come out motivated. He knows what he's got to do to get, let's say, ideal positioning or prime positioning for the playoff, and I think the Dogs get it done.
Okay. Now the game that really can mess everything up, thanks to a cold and may or may not have been rainy night in Berkeley. SMU loses to Cal, opening the door for Duke to get back into the ACC title game as a 7-5 team going against an 18th or so ranked Virginia. Every single poll has them in a different spot, but definitely the team that's in the top of the conference for the ACC. This is such a nightmare game, such a nightmare scenario for the ACC because while, yes, Virginia has been at the top of the conference and in conference play looked about the most consistent of anyone, if anyone has, um, but they still lack confident answers. I think that they still have a lot of question marks on that team, and this is now their 13th game. No position has really played consistently. Obviously, Chandler Morris has been banged up throughout the year. Don't know how much that may come into play in this matchup. Um, I don't know how to put it into words for Duke as well because Duke obviously is 7-5. Um, they don't like obviously have a lot of conference losses. They have a bad loss to Illinois, but then you look at it on paper, like we've discussed, really wasn't that far apart as the score made it seem. They played a very good Tulane team who has a chance to make the playoff this weekend as well. Um, so it's such a weird dynamic in this game. And I think that's why I'm leaning toward Duke here. I
Hmm.
think Duke really, this is a chaos game. Duke's season has just been total chaos. They're kind of living in it. So I think that's what gives the Blue Devils a chance in this. And I think it's going to be an absolute nightmare should the committee decide to rank Duke, say, ahead of a Sun Belt champion 12-1 James Madison, depending on where the American champion comes in at. I don't think that they can do that. So the ACC at real threat of being left out of the playoff. But I think going into this, Duke has a better shot than Virginia at this game. Pat, do you see chaos?
This is one I've been going back and forth on. because I really haven't been sold on Virginia all year. Obviously, that offense is really explosive and really electric when Chandler Morris has it firing and has it going. But there's been points, like you talked about, where it just looks like a total disconnect, and they definitely got away with some games that they probably should have lost but wound up winning. I mean, even that Louisville game where Morris played phenomenal, they win that game, but probably if you look at it, if Miller Moss doesn't have some costly turnovers, Louisville was the better team in that game. They lost to an NC State game in a non-conference game uh, that
Yeah.
is really up and down this year as well, and that's an NC State team that Duke was able to beat. But then they go into Durham and beat Duke quite comfortably. So I don't know. They're a confusing team, and I feel like Duke is quite confusing as well. You've got a really explosive offense. They've had a lot of success with their transfers this year. Cooper Barkgate from Harvard, Darian Mensah from Tulane, um, Anderson Castle, the transfer running back from Appalachian State. So you've had positives for Duke on the offensive side of the ball, where on the defensive side of the ball, there's been a lot of questions. Yes, you have Chandler Rivers. Terry Moore came back from injury. That kind of helped things a little bit. But for a defense that has a guy like Wesley Williams, who is a really solid edge, you would think that they would be a lot, we'll say, more effective than they have been at stopping teams and at, let's say, in particular, limiting explosive plays. Because of that, and because of Virginia's propensity to have those explosive plays, I think the Cavaliers keep this thing going somehow. It's definitely on life support. I think this is going to be
Yeah.
similar to like an SMU vibe that we got last year, where they're winning games that you're like, should they have won that? And it does catch up to them in the playoff, but I think they ultimately do win the ACC. Take a little bit of a headache off of the committee by doing so, and unfortunately for JMU, keep the Sun Belt out.
Okay. Very interesting pick there. We have a lot of splits this
Yeah,
weekend for
yeah.
conference championships, and what could be yet another split in a game of the century here. 1 versus 2, Indiana and Ohio State for the Big Ten championship game. Kind of a blessing that these teams did not meet in the regular season, given how they played last year, given how they were this year. We get to save this for the conference championship game. And really, Indiana has obviously found themselves under Kurt Signetti. This is a program that did not have much success at all. Really figured it out, and in year 2 proved that they are legit. Ohio State defending their national title. Julian Sayin has answered the call at quarterback for them and just led the Buckeyes and yet another great season. That being said, for this game, the Big Ten championship game, I like Indiana. I think that this is kind of a similar situation to last year. Ohio State loses to Michigan at the end of the season. They don't have a Big Ten championship game to play. They get into the playoff, new team. That loss invigorated them. Indiana, this is the biggest game in this program's history. They kind of need this conference championship game. Ohio State, yes, it's nice. They have it. They won the national title last year. They know how the season gets at this point. The Hoosiers need this win. I like them here, but if we find each other in the playoff, I really like the Buckeyes there. But getting ahead of myself a little bit, I like Indiana to win their first Big Ten championship.
You know, um, I, I
Gears
was
are turning.
I was kind of thinking about this one, and I was like, I don't know. Ohio State's defense has just been really dominant all year. Yes, Mendoza has been an amazing story, but can he do it against um, a defense as good as Ohio State's? And credit to Matt Patricia, he's been coming up with some really complex looks and schemes to confuse quarterbacks that they're not used to seeing at the college level. That I think even just builds on the talent that he has on that side of the ball. Caleb Downs obviously is a monster, helping solidify that defense. Jeremiah Smith and Cornell Tate, while they weren't 100% healthy, did come back from the Michigan game, so that kind of helped Julian Sayin get comfortable with those guys again, get that rhythm back in a game. And like all these things seem to show that Ohio State is just gonna steamroll everybody and run through and win the national title. But I don't know, call me crazy, but I'm kind of getting like last year's Oregon vibes from this Ohio State team where
Really?
they're putting up tons of points. They look great. They're undefeated going into the conference championship. Everybody's expecting them to win the national championship. And then, I don't know, something just kind of happens. Granted, Oregon did wind up winning that Big Ten championship against Penn State, but they gave up tons of points in that game. And then when we saw them again in the Rose Bowl, Ohio State just totally blew them out of the water. Right? I don't know. I'm just kind of getting a similar vibe from that. Credit to Ryan Day for riding the ship last year, kind of changing the narrative about him as a head coach. But I think that this year, I don't know, something's just different. It doesn't feel like we're gonna see the team that we expect to win actually win. And
Mhm.
because of that, I'm going with Coach Sig, Windiana,
Okay.
to complete a portion or a leg, let's say, of the dream season. Right? They've already done
Mhm.
12-0. Winning a conference title would be absolutely huge for this program.
Yep.
And I think, regardless, really, of what they do in the playoff, if Coach Sig wins this conference title, that's one of the most impressive things that you can do as a football coach is win the Big Ten at Indiana, of all places. Um,
Yeah.
so I like Indiana, and I don't know. I'm skeptical, let's say, that Ohio State's going to find a way to screw things up as we progress towards the end of the year.
Okay. We'll obviously talk more about the playoff hunt, but both of us ending the Big Ten championship with the Hoosiers. Um, yeah, lots to sort out next week as we come up with our playoff pick. The committee officially will come out with their playoff pick. Um, and then it's bowl season, baby.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing another great weekend of football, and we will see you all next week.